So I saw the comments that you sent last night. So I really want Jeff to use the Drew Carey line at the end, but then I kind of hinged my opening off of it.
I will tell him for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it was fun. We were here till pretty late last night getting set up, so I'm so sorry if I didn't think to give you those comments until.
No, it was perfect. It was fine. It worked out just fine.
And how's this table? Is it okay?
I think it's perfect.
All right.
Now the only thing is Jeff going to be okay, like with the excavator there and Mary. So we might.
What we could do.
We could probably just turn it around. Just like put it like so.
You could set the salamander on top of it.
Yeah. Perfect.
Salamander's first anything.
Yeah.
It's like hidden. Mary's probably gonna be wondering what the heck is.
I know. Yeah, we might need to say, well, don't say anything about it because it's part of our shtick.
Don't give it away.
Yeah. I think so. I've got my notes. I've got.
Just speaking into this mic.
Okay.
Works really well. It picks
Yeah.
up. So we're gonna actually set it off. This button on the left. You hold it down and it turns green. Now, if you speak into that, it'll be fine. If you do want to mute it at this point, just tapping it turns it orange, and then tapping it again green, and then if you hold it down.
Can I get a paper thing from CC?
Yeah, he'll have a paper one. All right, welcome everyone. It's nice to see everybody in here. I think we're going to have to set up a few more chairs because there's still lots of folks out in the hallway. We're going to start in about 5 minutes, so if you want some more coffee or food, please help yourself, but we'll start in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. We've still got people out there and they'll be wandering in here, but we've got to get started. We've got a very busy program today, and I'm delighted to see you all here. Welcome to today's EPN program, where we ask the question, whose job is it to restore our streams and wetlands anyway? Greetings to everyone here in the room and those joining us remotely via YouTube. I think we had about 250 people register for the online program, and we're expecting a lot of people to join us in a hybrid format, so realize that some of our format here is structured to make sure that we can engage the people that are joining us virtually. It's wonderful to see so many people here in the room. This is our largest attended sort of EPN since we've returned, and it's a great topic. My name is Jeff Sharp, and I'm the director of the Ohio State School of Environment and Natural Resources, and I'm delighted to be hosting you all here today. For those here in the room, I hope you enjoyed the chance to meet our school's seniors, many of whom are graduating in a few weeks. These seniors were part of a semester-long senior capstone project. You can learn more about these projects, the students, and their clients at the links provided within today's program. I also want to bring to your attention, by way of announcements, the Environmental Education Council and Ohio EPA are looking for environmental professionals to speak to high school students. If you are interested, please check out the brochure at your table. Another great way to network with students beyond just the ones you met with today. The poster presentations were made by students enrolled in courses taught by Professors Bill Peterman, Matt Hamilton, Greg Heitzun, and Tim Jaquette, and were conducted in collaboration with dozens of regional environmental organizations. I'm so delighted that several of you are part of those organizations that partner with our students. Hopefully you found this whole project, the projects they delivered to you helpful, and they look forward to seeing some of the actions implemented. For any of the students in the room who presented a research poster today, please could you stand up and let us just acknowledge you? I can hear many voices out in the hall, so it sounds like many of the students are still out there, so they'll be joining us shortly. Congratulations on your accomplishments, and wish you all the best as you prepare for your final exams, which I believe start later this week. If you look at the program brochure in front of you, you will see the individuals listed who chose to sponsor a student for today's EPN activities. I want to give thanks to those individuals. These sponsorships allow students to participate for free at our monthly events. Look around your table, and those wearing a name tag with a red circle, these were student sponsors today. Those marked in italics in the program and supporting a star on their name tag went above and beyond to sponsor 4 or more students while registering. Thank you. And this is really greatly appreciated because we love to get students here, and reducing all the barriers to their participation is great. So being able to offer them a free breakfast is wonderful. There's a QR code on the cover of your program which takes you to the online brochure for today's program. In our pursuit to host authentic zero-waste events, we are considering moving away from printed brochures into the digital format only for our 2022 programs. We know some participants, like me, enjoy a printed brochure, or I guess I'm so socialized to it, although I have to say I just gave up my print edition of the Dispatch, and I'm doing it totally online a week ago. It's a real adjustment, but I tell you, reading the print edition online is great. So we can do it, and I feel like I'm reducing my solid waste, and my recycling amount has diminished greatly in just the last week. So anyway, we're going to become print-free, and we hope you all can sort of like adapt to that. So take a picture of the QR code, check it out, and if you have any opinions on the paper versus digital issue, then please let us know through our event survey, which you'll receive an email regarding tomorrow. Also on your table today are holiday poinsettias, which were purchased by the EPN late last week from the Ohio State's Pi Alpha Xi chapter. Pi Alpha Xi is a national honor society for undergraduate and graduate students in floriculture and horticulture. Their annual poinsettia sale funds educational field trips and professional development trainings for students. Over 1,000 poinsettias and hundreds of other assorted holiday plants are featured in their annual sale, and we were happy to support that cause today. Now here's the exciting part. Those of you that have been with us before maybe remember this 2 years ago, but the poinsettias at your table are available for a free lucky couple of you. Check under your seat now, specifically reach under the seat to the right side of your chair to see if you're the winner. So at every table, at your chair, underneath your chair, there should be a yellow sticky note sheet of paper. Yes. If you're the lucky recipient of that yellow sticky note, the poinsettia is yours. If you don't want the poinsettia, just pass it on to one of your neighbors then too. But we're delighted to be able to offer that to a few of you, and it's wonderful that we can pass that on to you today. Moving into today's program, please review the bios for each of our speakers located in your brochure. It's been a privilege to get to know our first speaker today, Director Mary Mertz of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources over the past several years. She's been a wonderful supporter and a stakeholder for the school, and we're delighted to have her as a partner. As her bio demonstrates, Director Mertz has an extensive legal and leadership career in both public and private sectors. She's passionate about the outdoors, Ohio's natural resources, and the topics we are discussing today. Here in the school, we are very excited about H2 Ohio and the state's concerted focus and investment into our stream and wetland restoration and other initiatives. I will return to the podium to introduce today's panel following her remarks. But to get things started for today's Whose Job Is It Anyway program, please welcome Director Mary Mertz.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you this morning. I'm excited to be here. I was really excited when I was invited to speak for just a few minutes about water quality and ODNR's work with wetlands. We've been doing some really exciting stuff, and we have a great future ahead of us in that field, so I'm excited to share. So if you've heard me speak in the last 3 years, or if you've had the unfortunate chance to stand next to me in a grocery line or anywhere else for that matter, you've heard me talk about water quality and our efforts at ODNR to build wetlands and clean up the waters. So it's something I'm very passionate about, very excited about. So you've probably heard me talk a little bit about it before, but there's always more to say. So today, it's hard to imagine that long ago, much of Ohio was covered by a swamp, right, especially in the Northwest, as well as the forest cover. I mean, our state used to be home to so many trees. The legend was you could go from the shores of Lake Erie to the banks of the Ohio River. A squirrel could and never touch the ground. That's the legend, and I believe it. It was a beautiful state. It still is a beautiful state, but we have a lot of work ahead of us to return some of those natural features for all of our good. So it might be a little dramatic, that description, but that's what we're working towards. So obviously a lot has changed since then, so doing what we can to protect our waters, keeping them clean and healthy for Ohioans, not only for drinking, but for recreation, wildlife, for the economy. All of this is incredibly important, and it's really connected to much of what we do at ODNR. Today we have literally hundreds of employees who are either directly or indirectly focused on this very task, and their knowledge and expertise is varied. We have all types and specialties of engineers, biologists, hydrologists, other professionals, and all of them are connected by their passion for clean water, and their work is having a real impact. And I look around the room today and I see a number of ODNR employees that are involved in this very work. So if you all could just stand up so people know who you are, so they know who to connect with. I see people scattered at a number of tables. So these are some of our experts at ODNR who are doing great work in water. Please join me in thanking them. I appreciate all they do every day. So some of our work, let me give you a little bit of history on it. So one great example I want to tell you about is Pickerel Creek. So the northern portion of Pickerel Creek Wildlife Area, up north, lies in the center of some of the finest wetland habitats still in existence along the Sandusky Bay. And this area used to be an extensive wet prairie where waterfowl flourished thanks to the clear waters. But as the surrounding land was cleared and drained for agricultural use, the wetland habitat was seriously damaged and waterfowl numbers decreased. The Division of Wildlife acquired Pickerel Creek Wildlife Area back in 1987, and since then more than 1,100 acres of wetlands have been restored, and the restoration was extremely successful. And now during the spring and fall migrations, large numbers of waterfowl are attracted to the area. Duck, geese can be seen there along with numerous bald eagles, and the clean water support many species of fish. It's a real success story. But since the 90s, additional land purchases and restoration projects have been completed at Pickerel Creek Wildlife Area, and now it's 3,500 acres. It's a project we're very, very proud of the success achieved there. And since this region continues to support a good waterfowl population, it's presently managed as public hunting, fishing, trapping, wildlife observation, with an emphasis on waterfowl and other wetland wildlife. And the water quality benefits are innumerable. I had the chance to see some of this, an aerial view of some of it, and you can physically see the difference in the sedimentation moving through these areas. Another great example up in Northwest Ohio of the power of wetland restoration, you can see at Howard Marsh over on the Lake Erie shore. I hope some of you have been there. It's a great example of multiple agencies and organizations coming together on an ambitious and important project. The property is known historically as Howard Farms, and it was one of the last remaining really large tracts of land in the western Lake Erie Marsh region that could be developed into a quality wetland complex. So back in 2008, this was a project a long time coming, the site was purchased by Toledo Metro Parks, but with funding from ODNR's Division of Wildlife, the Clean Ohio Fund, and other sources. And restoration of that site converted more than 700 acres of farmland into a wetland. It also added a lot of fun visitor amenities, hiking trails, kayak launches. I've both kayaked and hiked there. Federal, state, local, private grant dollars were all used to restore the property, a great example of collaboration. In 2018, that work was completed and Howard Marsh was open to the public. And now it's an area that is absolutely spectacular and beautiful, and we're working with them on how it can help with some of our water quality efforts as well. So that took millions of dollars from a number of partners and years of work, but the result is a wetland habitat that aids water quality and nutrient reduction and created new wildlife habitat. And we hope this property will continue to provide enormous environmental and recreation benefits for residents and become a must-see destination for nature enthusiasts. It's the kind of thing we love to see. So when in 2019, Governor DeWine announced his vision for safe, clean water for all Ohioans, I was all in. I mean, he tasked 3 agencies, Ohio EPA, Ohio Department of Agriculture, and Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and the Lake Erie Commission to work together on this strategy, and H2 Ohio was born. And with the support of the General Assembly, we were able to get significant funding to do absolutely incredible work. So our partners, I'm sure at some of these breakfasts you've heard from the Ohio Department of Agriculture. They're out there working on best management practices across the landscape with all of the producers. The Ohio EPA is really focused on replacing lead lines, replacing home septic systems, other water quality work. But our focus has been how to achieve that clean water goal through the creation and restoration of wetlands. So we're excited about these projects because they're nature-based, and the science shows they should naturally improve water quality by trapping, filtering, removing excess pollutants and nutrients, like phosphorus, from the water before they flow into our lakes and contribute to those harmful algal blooms. And as Pickerel Creek and Howard Marsh illustrate, they also create great opportunities for recreation and wildlife habitat. So to date, since 2019, middle of 2019, we got our first budget to provide funding. We have opened over 80 projects out in not only Northwest Ohio, although that's where we focused, but in Northeast Ohio, Central Ohio, and Southern Ohio. We just announced a whole set of, I think maybe a dozen projects in the Ohio River Basin. So while our first focus and our press was on Lake Erie, and we will continue to be very focused there, we are extending some of our work into the Ohio River Basin. So that too is wetlands work, although we're also looking at some acid mine drainage work as well. Some of that is aided by wetlands, some of it isn't, but we're excited about what we might accomplish there. And one of our employees who stood up is the manager of that program, Eric Sauce, who I saw sponsored one of the students here today too. So thank you for that, Eric, and we appreciate his good work and leadership on all the folks who work on these projects. I mean, an important thing to know about these projects is we don't just do them ourselves. So some of them are engineers, are experts, are biologists. You know, we hire our contractors to do some of this work on our property, but the vast majority of them, we work with private partners. And I think I can safely say at this point, we've exhausted our private partners with 80 wetland projects out there. I know there is a great need, all of you students, for the engineers and biologists and experts to help with this work, because we are soon will reach full capacity in this work. So I'm excited about that. And you'll note I said this work should improve water quality. The science says it should. There's been a lot of research in this area, but certainly not enough. And I see Chris Winslow back there, and Chris has been absolutely key in organizing the Lake Erie Aquatic Research Network. So this is the outfit that is going to hold us honest. This is a consortium of higher education institutions that have water quality experts, and they are going out, and I've been there, and they brought their students, and they are doing water quality sampling. They have put together a very detailed protocol and methodology on how they are going to analyze, judge, gauge each of our projects. And you know, we've been in a hurry to get some of this done, so there's probably going to be a couple mistakes along the way. We're going to discover that some of these wetlands aren't as effective as we thought, and in some cases, maybe not effective at all. I think most of them will be, but we want to learn from what we see. And so this consortium led by OSU and the Sea Grant program, we're very excited what they're going to produce for us and the guidance they're going to give us along the way. Adaptive management in action. We will change what we do based on what the science tells us. So I'm excited about the progress we've made, but we're not done. We'll have another budget coming up. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do even more. But by the time we have spent the $50 million we got in just this last budget, and there was even more before that, my guess is we'll have 100 projects on the ground. They might not quite be complete yet. Some are already done. We have dozens that are already done. Others in the works will be complete in 22. Others that have a 23 deadline. I think I'm sad to say there might be a few that have a 24 deadline. Those are bigger, more sophisticated projects. But I think it's unprecedented, the resources we're putting into it, the number of projects, and what we're doing. And this group in here, we need your help to get the projects done, to evaluate them, and ensure success in getting clean water for all Ohioans. So that is my intro. I appreciate it. Again, thanks so much for letting me speak, and I look forward to the panel.
Thank you, Mary. It's wonderful to have such a commitment by the state to these kind of issues, and we appreciate your leadership, and thank you to your whole team for everything you're doing. It's exciting to hear about the momentum behind H2O, and the many ecosystem restoration initiatives happening across our state. So on to our main program. So today we're going to be looking at the alignment of two critically important fields, ecology and engineering. I could go on at length about the role Ohio State's had in the whole field of ecological engineering, from its founder, Dr. Bill Mitch, to some of the work that's been done at the Olentangy River Wetland Research Park. We've had a long history at Ohio State of supporting these kind of initiatives to improve the environment through engineering and synthesis with ecology. It requires a lot of disciplines and applies to the restoration, design, and construction of aquatic and terrestrial systems. The synthesis can be challenging when specialized fields of expertise are needed. But today we're going to sort of break that down and approach this from a multidisciplinary standpoint, looking at the themes of today's program through the lenses of some experts and probably engaging you in the process. So before I introduce this, I'm going to just give a personal anecdote. I have always felt like the wildlife folks give the best presentations because they have these wonderful visuals that they can put up on the screens, and it's always entertaining to see it. The forestry folks, I just haven't been that thrilled. I mean, they do a great job and they're very solid, but it's like I think forestry needs to step up to the challenge. But today, we're bringing the water scientists to the floor, and I think they are going to put us all to shame, I hope, in terms of their creativity and artistry that they bring to their presentation of this topic. So I am looking forward to seeing what this program works out to, and I'm very excited to introduce the very bold Mark Dilley and Brian Torrens, and our moderator, Drew Carey. Oh, wait, no, I mean Gail Hesse is stepping in today. Drew wasn't available. Their professional bios are in your program. If you are watching through YouTube now, then you please visit the links posted there. So without any further delay, our panel of experts, please tell us whose job is it anyway to restore Ohio's wetlands and streams?
Well, Jeff, I hope you didn't make that mistake on the intro because you think I look like Drew Carey. And as I was preparing for today, I was digging deep to find my inner comic, hoping that it didn't look like Drew Carey, but then also realized I don't have one. While I'm not a comic, I am also not, excuse me, I'm just trying to get my phone here. There we go. So while I'm not a comic, I am also not an ecologist or an engineer, unlike our panelists here. And I acknowledge that my superpower in this realm has always been to know a little bit about a lot of things. And so my experience with ecological restoration has been over the arc of my career as a permit writer, a grant writer, a grant administrator. So again, knowing a little bit about a lot of things, unlike our two panelists here, who have deep knowledge and expertise in their respective fields. And Jeff, it was nice that you mentioned Bill Mitch, and that I had the occasion to work with him off and on over the years. And in fact, I was a volunteer helping to build those boardwalks out at the Olentangy Research Park. And at one time, it was a cold, cold winter when we were out there. And at one time, there was even a plaque commemorating those of us who braved those frigid temperatures. And then a few years ago, I was with Bill again out on a field site, and this was actually during a polar vortex. So again, very, very cold. And Bill is out there directing students, talking to reporters, and the icy, snowy wind is blowing around us on a very gray day. And we're decked out in Arctic gear from head to toe. And finally, he just stopped, turned around, and looked at me and said, "Gail," he said, "I just think there should be more wetlands in the world." I was like, I agree. And so it doesn't matter what renown or acclaim anyone may have, but it all comes down to that simple, straightforward motivation. It's like, I just think there should be more wetlands in the world, and I just think more streams need to be restored. So today, our panelists, as we heard from Director Mertz, who is putting more wetlands out there in the world, so are our panelists. They are restoring wetlands. They're also restoring streams across Ohio. But before I give them a chance to introduce themselves, I'm going to explain the format of the program for you in just a moment. So I will have a prompt for each of the panelists to respond to. And we have some props, and I also have a buzzer. And I also have a bell that will be employed as needed. And their responses will also be scored. And so there'll be points awarded. And by the power of the podium invested in me, I get to score the points. Except for one question, when we will look to the audience to participate in that scoring. And there'll be some other opportunities as well. So we have a series of prompts, and then we're going to end with a lightning round. And again, points will be awarded, guys, so be aware. And then we'll turn to the Q&A, starting with, I think, any questions that come in from those watching virtually, and then questions from the floor. So with that, panelists, would you like to introduce yourselves? And Mark, would you like to start us off?
Sure, thank you. Is this working? Okay, great. So this crazy idea for an EPN topic started over a beer with Joe Campbell. I was sharing my experience as chief scientist at Mad Scientist Associates, mentioning how my wife, Chris, our CEO, and I specifically set out to build an ecological and wetland consulting firm, not an engineering firm. And then told him about how we've encountered some challenges by not being an engineering firm. Specifically, we've encountered hurdles trying to meet project requirements that stipulate that our wetland restoration plans must be stamped by a PE. Are there any Seinfeld fans out there? So I am treating today's presentation as a festivus of sorts. And in the spirit of the holiday, I'm here airing my grievances as I shared them with Joe. This standard PE requirement conveys a message that regardless of their qualifications, a professional engineer is automatically better suited to sign off on wetland restoration plans than a professional wetland scientist such as myself, who has spent 30 years investigating, understanding, and restoring wetlands. And I asked rhetorically, why shouldn't I be afforded the opportunity to stand behind my work? I am confident in my work, and we pay a bundle to maintain our professional liability insurance. Joe then suggested that this would make a great EPN topic, to which I replied, maybe so, but with our multitude of working relationships with engineers and engineering firms, I'm just concerned that it could be career suicide. We'll see how this goes. Brian?
Thanks, Mark. You know, to me, it's no wonder that they require a PE stamp, because for the last, I don't know, if you look about it, outside of the last 10 to 20 years when we decided it's time to restore our wetlands, what profession, and who would you rely on, has spent more time and energy over the last 300 years draining the wetlands? So who knows more about them than engineers, right? It's been our job. No, I joke about that, but in all honesty, where my position right now at Burgess Niple is I lead a team of multidiscipline team of engineers, wetland scientists, environmental scientists, geologists, and geotechnical engineers, all with the goal of, exactly as Director Mertz alluded to before, water quality, and we're doing that through restoring wetlands and streams. And that's where our real goal is at this point in time. So I'm looking forward to this engaging conversation, and when Joe turned to me and said, hey, Brian, would you join this panel? I'll admit I was a little apprehensive at first because, quite honestly, Mark, I think it could be career suicide for you.
Very funny, Brian. It's a rare and beautiful thing when an engineer can get a laugh. Folks, did you know that engineers are so protective of their industry that there's actually a lawsuit levied by a state engineering certification board to shut down a restaurant chain that had the audacity to call themselves the pizza engineers? In the wetland and stream restoration business, professionals like me are often working to undo the past work of drainage engineers. Maybe we can fly under the radar by describing our restoration efforts as engineering. Trademarking that term, by the way.
All right, gentlemen. Back to your corners. For that round, 0 points for each of you. So for our first question, it's about habitat. Because when we talk about ecological restoration, one area that needs to be addressed is habitat. And that means habitat for both plants and animals, like salamanders. So panelists, how do you, as an engineer and as an ecologist, factor in habitat in the work that you do?
Want me to
Oh,
start?
I'm sorry, Brian, please, go first.
Well, so right out of the gate, of course, you hit me with my weak spot. So as I was introduced, I'm a civil engineer by trade here at the Ohio State University. And one thing back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was in school here, we did not have civil engineering classes was anything on habitat or ecology. So that is my weak spot. But that's where I rely on that team aspect that I talked about before. Quick story, one of the first wetlands we were doing was back in the late 90s. Franklin County Metro Parks came to us and said, they took me out into a field, a 300-acre field, and said, we want to build a wetland here. I said, fantastic, we can do that, we know how to do wetlands. But my next question was, well, why? Their answer was quite simply, well, take your prop, for example, we want to build habitat for salamanders. I'm not sure why they hired me after that point, because I'm sure I had a very dumb look on my face as I blankly stared at them about, I don't know the first thing about a salamander, I might be able to draw you a picture of one. But that's where that team aspect came into play. Not only them, but also our own environmental scientists back in the office quickly enlightened me on what the habitat of a salamander is. That it needs shallow water. We don't want birds preying on those things. It's got to be shallow, vernal pools, first time I'd ever heard the term vernal pools, from that aspect of it. But again, very quickly I came up to speed on what a salamander requires, and we created 300 acres of wetlands that were just there to restore the habitat for salamanders. You go out to Patel Darby Nature Center or Metro Park, in the Metro Park system, you can see the success that it's had. So that's where I come into play with the looking back at what we can actually do from the habitat standpoint. When we turn to a stream restoration job, it's the same thing. I like the fish, and I can kind of identify areas where the fish are going to be hiding, but those environmental scientists we have can point out to where we need those deep pools that are shaded, where we need, what kind of substrate we need in the stream. They're going to keep me on the straight and narrow from that standpoint. I can work through the hydraulic aspects. I can work through the erosion aspects. They're going to help me with the other portions of it.
Great. In our process, we really focus a lot on site analysis and opportunities and constraints. We'll have targeted species that we are intending to benefit, but we really want to understand the site, what opportunities it offers, what constraints are there. We want to think about source areas for biota to find their way into these wetlands, the connectivity of these sites to other ecosystems, and that's very important in our process. And it is a multidisciplinary sort of look at the particulars of a given site to really come up with the best design that takes full advantage of the opportunities that a site presents.
Well, okay, this is my first scoring. I think 5 points goes to Brian for being an engineer who understands the importance of habitat. Go, Brian. So our next question is about it goes into a different direction in terms of the work that you do. When I first started my career at Ohio EPA, I was in the planning office and got to do a whole variety of different things. And I was trying to explain to my brother what I did, because I did some field work, I did office work, I did a variety of things. But being an English literature major, he just wasn't getting it. And so he finally looked at me, he's like, so, okay, Gail, he's like, what do you wear to the office? Do you wear a lab coat? Are you in jeans and boots? Or do you wear office clothes? So our question now is going to be more about your daily work. And so, are you in the field or are you in the office? And lucky for you, for those who are wearing masks, because these could be stinky. So, Mark, would you like to start us off on what does a day at work look like for an ecological engineer, a wetland scientist, and then Brian as an environmental engineer?
Sure. It's a real mixed bag in consulting, but in my ideal world, I'm spending as much time in the field as I can get. Office work is the price you pay for wanting to do field work. writing proposals and writing reports. But the field, for me, is really where the design process happens, and that's where I like to spend my time. So I'm oftentimes in work boots and trying to really get a very clear vision of what the design for a particular site should look like.
Well, one thing that COVID's taught us, I think, is that the lines are very blurred now between field clothes and office clothes. This, for your information, is probably the most dressed up I've been in about 18 months. So I had to check and make sure the dress pants and dress shoes still fit today. In reality, yes, I still will do a lot of work in the field. We do have a lot of our environmental scientists. We'll do exactly as Mark alluded to. When I go out in the field, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Actually being there in person is priceless. Just from the standpoint of really getting the lay of the land, the contours. Am I getting enough water to where we want to create this wetland? Am I getting too much water? And then where does it want to go ultimately? So that way, ultimately, I can design a system that is both efficient, it's natural, it's going to fit in with the landscape, but also manage the water in the way it's got to be. If I'm designing a wetlands for treatment, I want to look at detention times. I want to look at how that's set up from that standpoint, so I want to make sure I'm not going to short circuit through it. Also, as an engineer and a project manager, a lot of times I'm looking beyond even just what I want to create in the end. I also have to look at it from the standpoint of how we can actually get it built. How's the contractor going to get the big toys out into the site? Is it going to be a long road that we're going to spend a lot of money building a gravel road they're just going to rip up in the end? Or is there a way they can get there more efficiently from that standpoint? All the excavation dirt we're going to dig up, where can they take it? Where can they bury it? Where can we spoil it on site and save money that way? Those are all aspects that we start to look at when we look at these projects. When we're back in the office, though, yes, it's a lot of collaboration between all those disciplines we talked about and how we most effectively can get these things created.
My first meeting back in person after COVID, I had a colleague say to me, "This is the first time I've worn pants with a zipper." So on this question, interesting responses from both. But here is where we get a little bit of audience participation, because I'm going to ask you to clap for each, when I call on each of our panelists, and then me, being judge and jury with the power of the podium, will determine who gets the loudest applause and who gets the points for this question. For those who want to clap for Mark, please clap. And those who want to clap for Brian, please. Ooh, oh. Looks.
I think Mark paid some people off here.
I know. I think he's got poinsettias back in his truck. Yeah, to hand out. Well, with that, Mark, it looks like you've got a lot of friends and ecological engineers in the room.
I did kind of stack the deck. I have most of my wetland ecology students here today, so thanks, guys.
Holds the power of the grade over you, doesn't it?
Okay, so for our next question, it's about thinking about RFPs or requests for proposals, because we know most projects, if not all, start with an RFP. And it's your opportunity as an ecologist and as an engineer, where you lay out your plans for the project. Knowing that we want more wetlands in the world and more streams restored, how do you approach a project to ensure success? Brian, would you like to start us off?
Sure thing. Well, the first question whenever I get involved with a project, I alluded to it earlier on my example, is I'm going to ask the question of why. Why do you want to do it? Because success is defined exactly by what the client or the individual, why they're actually restoring the wetland or why they're doing the stream. Is it for habitat restoration to create a salamander habitat? If that is, that's great. If it's to actually create a wetland for water treatment, for water quality improvements, that's great as well. But I want to understand the purpose behind it, because that's what actually defines success for us. I can create a great Cat 3 wetland for you, but if my objective was to actually entreat water quality, and in the end of the day I'm not meeting an NPDES permit for that actual wastewater treatment system I've created, I haven't achieved success. So again, I think it's all it's kind of defined by the project and what you're doing it and why you're doing it and how we define it.
I definitely agree with those comments. I think that it's also important. This is something that I talk about with my students in class to have that overarching objective for a project. It's really important to have a primary objective that you're designing to, but there are also varied definitions of success. One is permitting success if we're creating wetlands for mitigation, and I think that's a little bit more of a narrow focus. You have to have a certain acreage, maybe a certain vegetation index of biotic integrity score, but a more important definition of success is ecological success, and that is a favorable comparison that can be drawn between your restored wetland and a nearby reference area that's considered to be of high quality. So it's important to understand the ecoregion that you're working in, identify those reference areas so you know where the bar is set and really understand what you're trying to achieve.
Could I just piggyback on one thing that you alluded to a little bit earlier, is on the RFPs, and going back to where this whole thing started with Mark does the RFP, do you have to have a PE to do what we do? And I'll as the engineer, again, I'll kind of talk down my own discipline at times about it, and that I agree with Mark from the standpoint, a lot of times these wetland restoration projects, you don't necessarily have to have a PE behind your name to accomplish what you're trying to do. If you're thinking back about where the PE comes from is why people relied on it. It's for protection of the public health and safety. That's what it's there for. They rely on us to look to our profession to protect that aspect of it. If I'm creating a wetland for habitat restoration, for mitigation, you don't necessarily have to have a PE to do it in reality. Again, it's that team effort we've talked about. Where I think the PE does come into play is a stream restoration, sometimes where we have to worry about floodplains and the flood impacts you're having on the neighbors. Yes, okay, you're going to get, the only way you get through FEMA is with the PE. If we have an actual NPDES permit with a discharge limits where we're doing a wastewater treatment system for, with a wetland for a landfill, leachate or something like that, okay, the EPA is going to require that PE to say you understand how the treatment process works to get you there. So I think that's where that line can be drawn.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well, and would back up that comment. I think one thing that's particularly unique about wetland restoration is that although wetlands are intimately connected to their surrounding environment, it could be argued that they are perhaps they have a level of independence from other adjacent areas that you don't have with streams. Engineers are necessary in that process for stream restoration because there's infrastructure and public resources involved, and the engineers are constantly having to contend with whatever problems are occurring in a watershed, oftentimes having to meet a moving target in terms of discharge levels in those streams and things like that. So there's a lot of hydraulics and specific engineering analysis that's necessary.
All right, you guys made that one tough to score, I will say. But Mark, once again, I'm going to have to go with you. For being an ecologist, advancing the field of ecological restoration, and being willing to commit career suicide. And finally, for naming your firm Mad Science Associates. Okay, the next one is on the future of ecological engineering. So the field of ecological engineering continues to evolve. As we reflect on its history and think about the future, what skills and abilities will best prepare our students? Now, we've had props for many of these questions, but in this instance, I'm going to ask the students in the field of ecological restoration to stand up, those that are staff and postdocs to also stand up, and for those of you at home, raise a hand as well, because while we may not be together, we feel you. But you, if you could all, those of you that are students in the field, please stand. Because you indeed are our prop for this question. As we think about what are the skills and abilities, and you can sit while we hear from Mark first about his thoughts on the skills and abilities and what we need to teach our future leaders in this field.
All right. I see the field heading towards greater focus on monitoring and measured results. The current state administration is doing a great job in pushing on this front through its H2 Ohio program. Thank you, Director Mertz and Governor DeWine. My best advice to students is to have the heart of a lifelong learner and become an eager and invested student of nature. Good restoration design isn't something you learn from a book. In my mind, good restoration design doesn't occur behind a computer. It unfolds in your mind as you're traversing a site and understanding the opportunities that it presents. As my mentor, Dr. Mitch, always emphasized, you have to factor in Mother Nature and Father Time to accomplish good restoration.
I'll piggyback a little bit what was said here. That I think from the aspect of what I hope you've learned from me at least, and from Mark as well a little bit today, is that know your limitations. As an engineer, I openly admit right off that first question that you asked us about, I know that my limitation is the habitat side. I'm not a person that understands exactly what every species of bird wants to see in their wetland or their habitat. I don't understand that. But it's a team effort, and it's every one of us that kind of comes together to create solve these problems from a water quality, a habitat, a mitigation, whatever the issue that we're dealing with, how we solve those problems. And it's everybody from the engineer, to the environmental scientist, to the wetland ecologist, even to the guy on the backhoe. I mean, let's face facts. You're even on the construction side, you're dealing with an industry that for years I'm trying to hit 98, 100% compaction on my soils. Well, now you put that guy down in the middle of a wetland and say, no, I don't want you to do that. It's a world of difference to them. So even those folks have a key role in this aspect of what we're trying to do. So from a profession standpoint, my advice to you is just, again, know your limitations and have an open mind, because the education is there. As Mark said, it's 30 years. Both of us have over 30 years experience in this field. And I think that part of it, it's stuff you're never going to learn in school. But it's just have that open mind on when you go out to think and you go out to learn. and every project is different, and trying to have that aspect to it is key.
Great advice from both panelists, which means equal scores for both. So now we're going to move into our lightning round. It's intended to be a little quicker and rapid fire. I'll arbitrarily hit the bell or the buzzer, and we'll just go through these, and then we'll shift into the Q&A. So, describe briefly your best day in the field.
I'll take that one. So my best day, I'm going to go back to the salamander story. It was actually probably, I don't remember, it was just about 2 years ago. Metro Parks called me back out to the same wetlands that we'd created. It was a wonderful day in the field because actually you got to pat yourself on the back for success. However, that success came with consequences. Their next story they told me was, okay, now here's the problem we've created. We've got so many salamanders, so many frogs, amphibians, that we're having over 1,000 of them killed on the roadway every year trying to cross it. So what was cool about that day was, I got to meet some amazing people that are either volunteers or workers for Metro Parks, that they know so much about salamanders and so much about what is in the mind of a salamander. I hate to admit it, but they know more about salamanders than I know about my own daughter. Kind of scary, I know, hopefully she's not here. But that's the way they think, but it was amazing to listen to them and see them in the field, and we actually communicated or talked about ways to actually solve the problem. And in the end, we created salamander crossings. We actually had tunnels built underneath the roadway as a pilot project to see how it works, to see how we can get salamanders to the other side. They're actually got folks out there at nights right now monitoring to see if it works. And so we're looking forward to that, because I think that's the next area we can move into with this field, as well as just, all right, now how do we take those animals and protect them further?
This was a tough one. I have lots of interesting stories from exciting days in the field, but the one I'll choose to share, we did a project for Reynoldsburg City Schools to create an outdoor learning space that received some state funding for construction under Section 319, and we created this wetlands in the area that they referred to as their eco lab. And we really, one thing that's very important to us at Mad Scientists Associates is public education. We love to get out with the public to do different types of programs, and we really wanted to know that the teachers understood what they had, what that resource was at the Eco Lab, and how they might utilize it. So our staff person Jenny and I were out doing some teacher training, and we had set funnel traps in the pools around the site to see what we could catch, and we're expecting tadpoles basically, to train the teachers in how to trap and identify these critters that were showing up in their wetlands. And one teacher said, "Do you think we have turtles?" And I said, "I doubt it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they showed up at some point." And we led them around the site to retrieve the traps we had set. And about the third trap in, we pulled a trap up with a little baby painted turtle in it, and it was such a hit. It was just very exciting to see nature moving in and claiming this space, and the teachers were gaga over a little baby turtle.
Okay, there, I've got to say, points, Brian, go to you for being an engineer who knows how to have fun in the field. So, Brian, you also mentioned at one point the toys in the field and the backhoe. And so this question has to do with the toys. Excavators. Do either of you ever get to operate one, get to sit on one, or wear a hard hat while on one? So either of you can go first.
I wish. I love to watch operators work. I was excited a couple weeks ago when our excavation contractor at the Burntwood Langenkamp H2 Ohio project invited me to hop up in his very large tractor that was hauling a pan loader to go look at something across the site, and I eagerly headed around to the passenger side of the tractor like a complete amateur, and he said, "You can only get on this side, come over here." One door in. So that was rather embarrassing, but I do get to wear a hard hat.
They don't trust me on big machinery. Part two, though, is hard hats. That's the whole reason you become an engineer, I think. I do get to put one on about once every 2 weeks, every week or every 2 weeks. So that's the fun part of the job, is wearing the hat.
All right. Mark, clap. Brian, clap. Brian, you got
We're
it.
getting better.
Getting better. You got it, buddy. All right, next one. Certifications. Are they needed?
I think I touched on this earlier. Certifications from the standpoint of when it comes to that public health and safety, yes. At the end of the day, I think the little nuance that is, at the end of the day, from someone who's the owner of a project and you're putting it out, if it's a wetlands restoration, I think what you're really after is who's the responsible person, because if it doesn't work, I want somebody to, unfortunately, blame or talk to. And so I think that part of it, there's got to be something that says you're responsible for it, and that whether that is a professional engineer, professional wetland scientist, one of those types of certifications, again, depending on the project, I think a certification is potentially needed there, again, just for that who's responsible for this project aspect of it.
And I would say with certifications that they're not absolutely necessary, but I do think that they are useful to prospective hiring entities that to kind of screen the credentials of the folks that they're working with. I personally, in my field, wish that we had some sort of more rigorous certification or even licensing sort of process like engineers, because I think it would help kind of raise the profile of folks like myself as professional wetland scientists to actually have to pass a test and not just show academic experience and field experience and project experience.
So you all heard that he wants to be an engineer, just for the record.
Engineer.
I'm hitting the buzzer because Mark brought up tests, and I'm sure the students in the room are not fans of taking tests. So I think, Mark, I'll give that one to you. So next question. So whose job is it, anyway?
I'll go back to, I think it's the team. It's all of us. I think if you've caught one theme that I like to rely on, it is a team. I go back to our office, and the folks we have within our office, it's that team effort. And a lot of times it's even the client. I'll go back to the Metro Parks, the folks at ODNR, working with them. It is all of us together doing that work, as well as, again, I'll go back to the contractor. They're priceless. And how well that project turns out in the end, I can put the greatest thing on paper on my design plans. But at the end of the day, taking it back out and having a contractor that knows what they're doing and who has done this before and can actually perform that work, and again, not get you 100% compaction when I want it to be a hummocked wetland area, that capability is priceless, and it's all of us together that pull this off.
As much as I would like to argue with Brian, I have to agree with Brian. I do think it's very much a shared responsibility. I think that particularly when we're dealing with wetland restoration, I would like to see the design effort more or less being led by ecologists and ecological engineers and supported by professional engineers or civil engineers. One thing that I was hoping to sort of bring out today as we're looking at these emerging fields is that ecological engineering is still somewhat of an enigma, I think, out in the engineering world and the professional world. I've actually spoken to students who have come out of ecological engineering who have said, I'm struggling to find work as an engineer because engineers view me as an ecologist, and I can't get work as an ecologist because ecologists view me as an engineer. We need to break through and increase the level of awareness of what an ecological engineer is and what they can contribute. So, I want to mention that.
If I could just follow up on that, I personally, we've hired ecological engineers recently. I did not know ecological engineers existed until about 5 years ago, and I don't know exactly how long it has existed. I met Dr. Martin here at Ohio State, and he enlightened me on what ecological engineers actually do. From that aspect, then we've gotten involved with the capstone program here with the students, got to learn a lot about what their capabilities are. And going back to that knowing your limits, and I think, again, where my shortfall is, where Mark will begrudgingly admit his shortfalls come in, I think ecological engineering is one that can bridge that gap because they have both the wetland science side as well as the engineering aspects to kind of bridge that gap for these types of projects. So I think they are a valuable resource from that end. And that's where I think I've learned a lot from it, and I look forward to learning more from the students as we continue to go.
Okay. Well, those guys agreed with each other. So I have to say, equal points to both. And so now, for our final point, an ecologist and an engineer walk into a bar.
Sounds like a great idea. Maybe in the future we can do an informal EPN breakfast, or EPN happy hour.
That's right.
But it's a little early in the day to start drinking, even for engineers.
Environmental scientists.
Did you want to respond?
Oh, the one thing I think we can both agree on, though, if we do this informal EPN happy hour, Joe's buying.
You got it.
All right, all right. Thank you, gentlemen. Well, right now you're neck and neck in terms of points. It might come down to the answers to the questions that we get from the audience. And so, Joe, I think you're fielding some questions from those that are streaming the event.
Okay, this is from, wow, we have a lot of questions. Colleen Crook. The question is this: what pre- and post-construction evaluations do you conduct to measure the efficacy of both hydrological and biological aspects of your stream and or wetland restoration projects?
Well, I used to work with Colleen, and that's a very in-depth question that I'm not surprised that she came up with such a great question to start us off.
I don't have a microphone, so Mark can take it.
Yo, you need, okay. So a lot of the monitoring efforts that we're responsible for are permit-driven. So we're obviously collecting data on sites, as I mentioned, before we do restoration, so we understand those site opportunities and constraints. And then post-construction, we're recording water levels, we're looking at the vegetation establishment, mapping the species that are coming in, the habitat types that are developing, doing stem counts, vegetation index of biotic integrity scoring to look at the quality of the plant community, mapping and eradicating invasive species to meet certain performance goals. So most of our post-construction monitoring comes down to permit-required monitoring.
From our aspect, it's similar response. Our environmental scientists will be looking on streams for QHEI, HHEI scores, what category wetlands we've created from that standpoint. From the hydrology standpoint, again, it's a lot of it is what are you accomplishing those? I'll go back to that point of what's your original goal and what is your measuring stick for success.
Go ahead.
Okay, and questions are open to anyone in the audience. So if you do have a question from in the room, please just raise your hand and I'll bring a microphone over. Our next question is from Hannah Commune, who I know Hannah because she had a class of mine a couple years ago. Hannah is with the Cleveland Metro Parks. And Hannah's question is, what certifications do you think are the most valuable to have?
A PE. Sorry. Again, I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Not necessarily a lot of these jobs, you don't necessarily have to have a certification for it. Again, I can't go back to the PE enough. The only reason it's there is for that protection of public health and safety. So again, it depends what we're trying to accomplish from that perspective. We have in our office folks with a lot of initials after their names, ones that I don't even know what they all stand for, I'll be honest, from that standpoint. So again, it just really depends on the specifics of what you're trying to accomplish for what that certification's for.
Like Brian, I'll gravitate towards the certifications that I have. Professional wetland scientist is a good one. I think that the Society of Wetland Scientists does a good job of documenting the training and experience of their PWSs, and they have a very good code of ethics that applies to the practice as a professional wetland scientist. the other newer certification that I really like, and I'm surprised it hasn't taken off even more than it has, but the Society of Ecological Restoration has a certification for certified ecological restoration practitioners, which I think is valuable.
Joe, there you are, Joe.
Hi, Courtney Shervanack. I work at DGL Consulting Engineers. A lot of the times as ecological engineers, we're kind of seen as the bad guy, or people are just frustrated because they don't understand the newer ways versus conventional ways. So how would you respond to either a client or a fellow engineer who doesn't quite understand the value of bringing more wetlands or just using those kind of practices in designing?
So how do you deal with clients or colleagues that don't necessarily appreciate all of what you're trying to accomplish?
It's a simple question. What the hell is wrong with you? No, I think it's all about education. There's a fair amount of hand-holding. I think that when clients and other professionals that you're working with begin to understand what we're trying to accomplish and can learn to take some pride in it, that it's a game changer. So I think the engagement of your clients, helping them understand that this really is a good thing, it's an investment in all of our futures, it's important to the health of the planet, that's an incentivizing factor.
I think the first thing you got to remember, just from your own perspective, is I'll go back to where I started this whole thing. Remember, engineers have been thinking one way for thousands of years, and for the last 300, we actively have been draining the swamp. I mean, that's what our job was. So you're trying to get some people who have, myself, I'll include myself in this family of people who have been doing this, and now all of a sudden we're asked to switch on a dime from a history perspective, our way of thinking that wetlands are actually good and that we need them. So I think it goes back to I always like to tell stories, if you haven't gathered that, and telling the story of here's a success project, here's what it accomplished, here's the results. Giving those as concrete examples, I think that's what gets folks suddenly engaged, and they realize, all right, yeah, it's not such a bad thing to have a wetland in your backyard.
Right, thank you. We can all say we all want more wetlands in the world, but we also need to back that up with why. So, Joe, there we go.
I'm not Joe, but
Yeah.
hi, Mark. So my question is, so Brian had talked about PE certification and how that's important to get the public's sort of trust, I guess, and help in matters. Do you think that civil engineering could also eventually get to that level of sort of recognition in terms of policy and getting policymakers to respect sort of ecological restoration to the point where it becomes an easier sell to the general public?
Easier sell from like a wetland scientist,
Right.
from policy.
Right.
Absolutely. I think it absolutely can. I think it's just going to take time. Again, I'll go back to the point of engineers have been doing this for thousands of years, and it took thousands of years to get that level of trust built up. For whatever reason, right or wrong, that we're looked at as the good guys, wetland scientists as the bad guys, naturally. So I think that's just the fact of it. I think, yes, it's just going to take time for the education of the general public and the population to understand the value that the wetland scientists and the environmentalists, the ecologists do bring to the table from that standpoint.
No, I didn't have much to add on that one.
Okay, all right. So
Question,
no to Mark. Okay, next question.
Hi, Sean Logan. That's a great question, and we may not have much time because the Ohio General Assembly is considering legislation right now to eliminate the protection for ephemeral streams in House Bill 175. So that was going to be one of my questions, but actually the question I'm really dying to ask is, if you've had, for both of you, if you've had an aha moment where a layperson, say a hunter or a fisherman, an angler, said to you, if you did this, this might be a better project.
They said that to us.
Here, use the mic. Yeah. So thinking about the recreational component to the restoration of our streams and wetlands, and thinking about, has that kind of input from the lay public influenced a project design?
I'm trying to give you a concrete example. I think most of our projects, again, I go back to know your limits. I've always got one opinion just when I go into a project of what it could be. There's thousands of them, and getting that public input is priceless from the standpoint of, yes, especially any parks that we've been involved with. Getting the public input on those workshops will change them. If you've ever been to Scioto Audubon Metro Park, we had a workshop up front at that park downtown. I think it was a 4-hour public involvement meeting, and just the ideas that people threw at us from a standpoint of what could be down there at that particular site was invaluable. And I think that if you've ever been to the park, it's a wonderful park. The things that you see there today, a lot of it came out of public input from that standpoint that is there in place today.
I think that input from the local community is extremely valuable, and I can't say that it directly altered our design, but certainly informed our design. We met a neighbor at the this Burntwood Langenkamp treatment wetland that was built near Salina, one of the water quality improvement wetlands being funded through H2 Ohio for improvement of water quality on Grand Lake St. Mary's. And the farmer, the homeowners that owned the property would have to drive across to get to the site, met up with us, and the woman there shared a video of the flooding of Burntwood Creek that was very enlightening to see the amount of water rushing down through that stream system. And you can glean some insights just from looking at drift lines and things, but until you see a video of this raging torrent of water coming down Burntwood Creek on its way to Grand Lake St. Mary's, you don't quite have the full picture. So that local knowledge is so important, and it's great when you have opportunities to solicit input from folks that have been around the resource, been around that piece of land on a regular basis for years or sometimes even decades.
Thanks. Joe, do we have another question? Yep, there we go.
All right, so I'm Tyler Freisinger, Strata Eco Solutions. I'm a newer business here in Central Ohio, focusing on soil restoration and natural property care. And so I've been studying this a long time, and I'm working on these residential properties here in Central Ohio, and I started thinking about all these urban areas, this urban sprawl that we have, and all these new neighborhoods that are being created. And especially my neighborhood up in Delaware, our water, flows from our street gutters and goes straight into the retention ponds. And everyone's always reminded that water flows straight into it. Says, drains to river, right? Don't dump anything in the gutter, drains straight to the river. So with all of the compaction we have in the soil, all the runoff that we're having, especially in these new areas, we keep increasing it because we're removing farm fields to put in residential neighborhoods, where a lot of the soil pollutants in that may have been contained in the farmlands and not necessarily drained in the rivers. Now we have all those extra pollutants going into our waterways. As I was sitting here listening this morning, I was thinking, well, what if we, between the retention pond and the river, if we started putting wetlands in on the edges of these urban areas, especially neighborhoods, things like that, maybe behind the neighborhood or something like that. Is this something that's being discussed? Maybe someone else in the room has experience with this. Are we considering providing those buffers between our natural waterways and these neighborhoods so that we're not leaching all these chemicals continually into our waterways?
Yeah, I think this is a actively promoted solution. I'd like to see more of it, but as a company, we've done several stormwater detention basin wetland retrofits, basically converting the footprint of a more conventional kind of 3-to-1 side slope rock-lined pit into something that actually functions as a wetland and still provides the water storage capacity. Generally, wetlands are considered to require a slightly bigger footprint than a storm detention basin, and their functionality is a little bit different, but when I see a storm detention basin, I feel like it's a missed opportunity, that we've spent a lot of money on engineering and rock and excavation, and in the right hands, that actually could be a functional ecosystem that is not only dealing with kind of delaying the release of water to rivers and streams in the area, but providing some improved water quality functions as well as habitat. So I think it's out there and work is being done.
I think it's absolutely out there. I think that's part of what H2 Ohio is about. It's not only just agricultural runoff. I think it's also treating some of the residential runoff as well, because they're taking water right along the streams and the rivers, and they're treating it as a kind of a buffer wetland on the edge in the floodplain wetlands that you've got there. One quick story again. I know I like to tell stories. Along those lines, it was a detention pond. This was back in the mid-'90s. We got a call from a doctor's office down in Cincinnati. There's no medical doctors here, right? We're okay. It was one of those outpatient surgery centers. They did not like the fact that their detention pond, had wetland vegetation creeping up on the edges. Where you got that slope, it's just still too shallow, you get the wetland vegetation up. They did not like it. So the landscaper called us, said, what can you do? Because I just got an irate call from the doctor's office. The way we had managed this in the past was I'd send my workers out there at 5 a.m. every day to pull whatever vegetation they could see, so that way when the doctor started rolling into the office at 8, there was no wetland vegetation. He says, what can you do to help us with this? Because today I got an irate call. My workers got there late, and it was a very hot summer day. They were stripped down to their skivvies out in the middle of this pond pulling wetland vegetation out. As they were doing it, and so the doctors were very embarrassed to see these guys, shirts off, everything else out there, pulling wetland vegetation. Our answer was, well, why do you fight it? All right, let's make it a wetland. Let's make it a high-quality wetland with the right vegetation, and let's do it that way. And that's what they ended up doing, was actually in the end converting that detention basin that you talked about, just converting the whole basin into a wetland.
Thanks. I think the question also, for me, prompts the potential for another topic for a future EPN breakfast, and that's how do we integrate the field of ecological engineering with land use and land use planning so that we can create those buffers and ameliorate that runoff into our water resources. And Joe, I think we have one more question, and I think we're going to wrap it up.
That's right. Final question here.
Okay. Hello? Okay. My name is Ari. I work at the experimental wetlands that you mentioned earlier. So my question is about defining success. So you talked earlier about defining what are the metrics before the project starts in order to know when you've succeeded. How do you balance things like, the client wants something very specific like salamander habitat with kind of long-term? I imagine you want to minimize intervention in the future, although monitoring will continue to occur. I imagine you want to minimize, again, that intervention long-term and kind of set this system up to be self-sustaining. How do you balance those things?
That's a good question. I think the answer to me a lot of times is that's the beauty of wetlands, is that they are self-sustaining. And it's, although we're going to focus on salamanders, and that's the habitat we want to create in this particular example, from my perspective, there's always going to be those side benefits we're going to get from them as well. We're always going to get water quality treatment because something's going to happen in the water. It's not just going to sit there and only be a home for a salamander. So those additional benefits are going to be there regardless. And I think if you go back to that why you're doing it, that's the only, even why do we need to monitor it? In the beginning, for Metro Parks, when they wanted to create salamander habitat, there was really no impetus for them that they had to go back and monitor. They were just curious if we got there. So even the monitoring perspective wasn't any requirement. It wasn't a mitigation requirement of a permit for them to go do it. So I think from that perspective, it's there. The only other things that we've seen that we have to go back and fix at times, or in our experience, is just looking at erosion. Water's a powerful force, and it's always going to want to cut and move soil. That's just the nature of it. Look at the Grand Canyon. It's all just, that's natural. It's all erosion, and that's what happens. From when we go back to how do you set it up for success, it's again that experience and the knowledge base that we've established to how do we make sure that control erosion. It's going to happen, but how do we control it and manage it in a way that we don't have to go back and fix it in the future?
And I think it's important to have realistic expectations and an understanding of how nature works. Wetlands do change over time. Streams probably even more so. Streams are such dynamic systems. A lot of people feel like if there's a river there now, there was a river in that exact same location 100 years ago, and chances are good that's not the case. Rivers are constantly moving on us and shifting and changing, and that's just the dynamic nature of our environment. So having those realistic expectations is important, and then as Brian alluded to, just setting the stage, giving Mother Nature the essential building blocks for improved functionality is really what we're doing, and trying to set things on a trajectory that improves the environment.
Thank you both. Well, as we wrap up, I guess I want to say kudos to our panelists for sharing their expertise and knowledge. Kudos to the panelists for willing to laugh at themselves. And kudos to the panelists for the agility in their thinking in going beyond the confines of their individual disciplines and having that agility and willingness to think differently and to work with others outside of our own individual disciplines. And so with that, I was actually really keeping score, thinking one of you was going to come out on top. But it's a draw. So we have a draw between the two of you. So let's hear it for our panelists. And Jeff, I'll turn it back to you, and I can get my stuff out of the way here.
You want to hug it out?
Well, thank you very much to the whole team for what a wonderful session and what a creative sort of way. There are a lot of memorable moments in this one that will really stick with me in terms of just this idea of working together as a team, and I really appreciate the creativity that went into this. And I don't mean to malign any group. What I'm really been impressed with our EPN network is just the creativity and the ability for you all to communicate really important ideas to us all. So thank you very much, and I apologize for anything I said disparaging about forestry. So I'll let you guys I'll let you guys come up here next time and sort of wow us with your own creativity. Certainly thank you to Dr. Mertz for our opening remarks on the value of wetland streams to our states and local communities. For those longtime EPN members, you will know that we provide certificates to acknowledge our speakers traditionally using glass and plastic frames. Well, thanks to both the supply chain shortage impacting our university suppliers and efforts to cut back on material product usage, we have a new form of recycled paper-based certificates. We just have them here, and I'll provide those to you a little bit later. So thank you. That's an acknowledgement to the work that you've done to help us learn and shape the world for better. Thank you. Please check out the content in our program for details of recent and upcoming EPN events. Last month was Native American Heritage Month. The EPN developed and released on their YouTube page a unique feature with Dr. Michael Charles, a chemical and biomolecular engineer and sustainability science from the Navajo Nation. Dr. Charles served as a representative of the Indigenous Peoples Caucus at COP26, the recently concluded United Nations Summit on Climate Change. Kalia Tellez was the Ohio Environmental Council representative that sat down to interview Dr. Charles to gather his experiences and takeaways from COP26, implications for Indigenous and tribal communities across the world. So if you haven't checked out our EPN YouTube page, you can find that, as well as you will find this program loaded up there shortly. The EPN returns to in-person breakfast programming on Tuesday, January 18th, as we combine and connect the fields of environmentalism, finance, and sustainable development. So we're going to be the finance people up here next time. We'll see if they hold their own in terms of helping us figure out how to solve these problems. We're going to learn from experienced professionals who are at the forefront of decarbonizing their companies' financial portfolios, setting and measuring sustainability goals through ESG and other methods of green investment. Please reserve your spot for that program by signing up today. This CPN was a zero-waste event. On your way out, please make use of the receptacles we have over here for disposing of your items according to composting, recycling, or trash. Thank you to all the students for your wonderful presentations. We really appreciate the wonderful participation in this event. Thank you for the 100 or so of you that participated online. This has been a great event. It's energized me, so go forth and do great work. Thank you.